Well, if the Coastal Commission doesn't want increased risk due to density, I would think that's the stumbling block right off the bat, unless we start putting pilings down to bedrock. But I'll let the lawyers worry about that. Any more questions on this section on the Coastal Commission specifically? If not, we'll move ahead with the rest of the presentation. And go ahead, Katie.
Okay, thank you. So SB9, the intent was to increase our housing stock, and to do so it was by increasing residential densities within the single family neighborhoods. All eligible properties within a single family zone may be split into 2 lots with 2 residential units on each lot. So this is our zoning map, and I'm highlighting all of the R1 areas within the city of Capitola, just to kind of get a feel of what could be the impact of where will we see this densification happening. Brian went through and looked at all of the neighborhoods and just a bird's eye view using aerial imagery to see how many lots are currently developed in such a way that they have a lot of open space and could utilize SB9 without having to tear down their home, and likely could build at least a second unit, if not a duplex, maybe in the backyard or an area of open space. And looking at the different neighborhoods, these numbers represent the lots that we saw potential for SB9 without doing a total demolition of the properties. So, and then once we got the update from the Coastal Commission, I just want to point out that there's the coastal boundary in purple. And so this area you're seeing over in the top left-hand corner is really the area that currently applications can come in and be reviewed prior to this adoption. And it will take effect once we've adopted the ordinance, and then the area within the coastal zone once it's certified by the Coastal Commission. So it'll give us a trial run while we're going through the certification process with the coastal zone to see what occurs in our in that corner of Capitola. So the Sb9 ordinance, tonight you're going to see 4 different sections of code. We added section 16.08 for a definition of urban lot split. We added a section 16.08020 for the urban lot split. Sorry, I've got the number wrong for the definition. A subsection for applicability within our ADU section of code. And then we added a chapter 17.75 that describes the applicability procedures and standards for 2-unit development. So that's a new chapter, and it follows right after our ADU chapter. So urban lot splits, and at any time, go ahead and raise your hand. I can see the hands on my end. If you have questions, I'll stop. Urban lot split, it's a one-time subdivision of an existing single-family residential parcel into 2 parcels. Each property is allowed up to 4 units total, with 2 units on each parcel. And I see Cher Wilk has a hand up.
I do. Let's see if I can now lower it. Lower it. Okay. So my question is, so you're creating this ordinance update. What happens to applications that come in before it's adopted?
Before it's adopted, we follow the standards of the law, and we can apply only the objective standards within our code. So that being height, setbacks, floor area ratio of our existing code. So in the R1, they would get a height of 25 feet. The setbacks would be, they would follow the setbacks of the state law for 4 foot on the side. And
okay, but so you don't need to repeat all those, but my question would be, like, for example, one of the things we have in your proposed update would be you have to have room for a driveway, right? And so I don't know, so are there things in there that would indicate that, well, if we want to have more control over this in terms of driveway parking, utilities, you have it, it's in our best interest to get something on the books quickly rather than dragging our feet?
Definitely. Yeah. So we want to be able to guide it. Right now, we don't have much guidance in how development should happen until we've adopted something. So they would have the ability to develop and they'd be required 1 parking space per unit in your
And,
example.
SB9, sorry to interrupt, SB9 also includes several permissive sections which allow the city to decide if they want to require something or not. And so in order to, take that opportunity, we certainly, want to adopt something, or we recommend that, we would adopt something in order to be able to kind of hone in on the specifics of how to comply with state law.
And Commissioner Newman has a hand up.
I'll yield to Commissioner Ruth since he hasn't had a chance yet. Then I'll go.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Just a point here. Looking at the diagram, I'm guessing the way it's configured, there's probably 90% of the lots in Capitola could not meet that configuration. I know it's not to scale, but I think it's a little deceiving because it just doesn't represent reality of the size of Capitola lots and what we're seeing on the screen. That's my comment.
That's a great point. And we have a slide. Actually, we'll go through an example of that later in the presentation.
Oh, my question was, are these urban lot splits done by a typical parcel map and the same process? And so you have two separate lots with assessor's parcel numbers that can be separately alienated?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, so they can be sold separately after the subdivision's recorded. Okay, I'll move on. So there's a list of eligibility that was some that's related to state law. And I want to preface this presentation by saying we took a really conservative approach. The Planning Commission can always loosen the standards. We just took a really conservative approach to the standards that you'll see in here. So again, no more than two lots will be created. Each lot has to have a minimum of at least 1,200 square feet, and each lot has to have at least 40% of the lot area of the original parcel. And it has to have access to or adjoins the public right-of-way, sufficient with fire code. The second item has to have at least 40% of the lot area, will be probably the hardest requirement for most developed lots to meet, because most homes in Capitola are situated in the middle of the lot. I've got a question from Commissioner Newman.
He just never took his hand down.
Oh, okay, okay. Also, eligibility standards, it must be in the single family zoning district. The density limitation is not a reason to deny an application. The state has a list of qualified sites in which they cannot be located. They're tied to specific definitions for farmland, wetlands, fire hazards, hazardous waste, fault zones, floods. I won't read them all to you. They're not subject to income restrictions. So if there's an income restriction on a property, if there's rent control, if it's been subject to the Ellis Act, or if it's been rented in the past 3 years, the property is not eligible. It also cannot be part of a prior urban lot split. So you can't do this twice to your property. And then the map itself must comply with the Subdivision Map Act. And it looks like I have a question from Commissioner Ruth.
Yeah. Is the 1,280 square foot requirement, is that spelled out in SB9?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So objective standards that we've put into this chapter, parcels, this was actually they were taken from our regular subdivision standards. So parcel lines at right angles to the street, this is new, minimum frontage of 20 feet or minimum of 20 feet for a flag lot, or maximum of 40% of the lot width or 20 feet, whichever is less. We came up with the 20 feet minimum because our smaller lots are about 40 feet wide in Capitola. So we thought the minimum frontage of 20 feet would be realistic in Capitola, and then the 10 feet for a flag lot. I'll note for that standard, their minimums, At the end of my presentation tonight, I'm going to talk to you about whether these should be maximums. So also the other objective standards are 1 parking space per lot. There's exceptions based on the proximity to transit and car share. We don't meet the exception for transit. We don't have, our metro doesn't run every 15 minutes through the city. There's no lines that run every 15 minutes. So that's the qualifier for the type of transit listed in the state law. And then no setbacks for existing or reconstructed structures. And the lot split shall not result in the splitting of any structure between 2 lots and cannot create a new encroachment. And Commissioner Newman.
So these are standards that are applied administratively, right? There's
Administratively, yeah.
So if, for example, number 1, if someone, for one reason or another, the parcel line is not at right angles, but is at 85 degrees, and can they come to the Planning Commission to loosen that standard?
They cannot. We didn't set this up in our ADU ordinance. We have it that way that if they don't comply with all of the regulations, they can go to this Planning Commission. But no, at that point, the only way that we could modify that or be more flexible for them is if they can prove to us that they wouldn't be able to achieve 2 lots on that property and each and not be able to build 2 800 square foot units if the right angles was prohibiting them from doing that. So, okay. Commissioner Ruth.
How is the residency requirement monitored?
The way we've drafted the ordinance is that they would have to sign an affidavit, I believe, that would be recorded.
And is there any teeth in that?
There is. I think it's similar to what we've done with ADUs in the past for residency that we can follow up and enforce.
Okay, thank you.
So just a quick image of what the 20-foot minimum looks like for a lot split and a 10-foot for a flag lot. So the filing process, I'm sure you all read through this. I won't go through every step of this, but the biggest thing is that we've got to take action within 50 days. It's ministerially approved. There's no public hearing. It's a staff decision. And then it's really hard to deny these if they comply. So it either doesn't, we can only deny it if it doesn't follow all the standards or if there's a finding of adverse impacts on public health and safety or the environment. So use and development requirements also for the urban lot splits. I'm sorry, that's not right. Here we go. The vacation rental is prohibited within these developments. Residential use only, maximum of 800 square feet, 2 dwelling units per lot, and then that guaranteed allowance. So the objective standards apply to all urban lot splits except where such standards directly conflicts with the provisions of the Sb9, and whether the applicant demonstrates that that implementing those standards would have the effect of physically precluding the construction of 2 units on either of the resulting parcels that would result in less than 800 square feet residential units. So any questions with that? Commissioner Westman?
So in looking at your example of the flag lot, which was sort of my impression how a lot of these would happen, because there's going to be an existing residence there and they're going to try and add one in the back part of their property. The front house can't be more than 800 square feet, as well as the back house, 800 square feet?
Correct. We've drafted it that way. There's a, yeah.
Okay, I just want to clarify. We can talk about all this later. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the standards we've put together for urban lot splits. And next I'm going to go into the 2-unit developments, but any questions?
And just to clarify as well, commissioners, there could actually be 2 800 square foot units in the back and 2 in the front technically under SB9.
That are a max of 800 square feet.
Yeah.
So Katie, I have a question real quick. This vacation rental thing, I'm just trying to see if there's, how that would apply. If someone has a vacation home already and they say, well, I'm going to split this, wouldn't it be great to have 2 vacation homes? I'm in the vacation rental zone. You would split it, but then they would say, I'm sorry, but you have to live in one of these vacation homes, but you could rent the other one?
You can rent it long-term, more than 30 days. You would not be able to rent it short-term anymore.
So even if it's in a vacation zone, beach house rentals, whatever, rents this place, and he decides to split it, he says, well, I'm going to split this lot, live in one half, and to continue to rent out the other half. The answer is no, you can't do that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Katie, I had one more question, kind
Yes.
of related to Commissioner Wilt. So now the 2 parcels are legally split and they're now able to be sold, hypothetically. If the person that sells it, is there a deed restriction recorded per parcel that's then transferred to the new owner that restricts all of these requirements? Or is there something so go ahead.
That's a great question. I need to re-look at the, do you know the answer offhand, Layla?
I believe that we may have included some type of a deed restriction. And I know that, yeah, go ahead.
I just was curious as how would the next owner or 5 owners down the way understand that this 1,200 square foot lot could no longer be used as a vacation rental or had all these different limitations?
Yeah, that's a great point, Commissioner. We will review the draft and see if we need to make some clarification on that to make sure that that scenario would be covered.
Okay.
I know we require a deed restriction. I'm just not remembering if it's part of the urban lot split, which it should be for that. We should probably do it at the urban lot split. And it's also tied to the 2-unit development. So we'll make sure of that. Any other questions? No? Okay. Move on. So we added section 17.74040M to our ADU chapter. And this is just stating that no accessory dwelling unit or junior ADU shall be permitted on any lot in a single family zoning district if, and 1 being an urban lot split has been approved herein, and 2, a 2-unit development with 2 units has been approved for construction pursuant to chapter 17.75. Other jurisdictions have been looser with this. They're allowing the lot split, the 2 units through the 2-unit development, and then they'll also allow an ADU or a junior ADU. We've drafted because our lots are so small, we drafted our ordinance to not allow the ADU and junior ADU in addition to the 2 units. That's something you could direct us to change this evening. And that's why some of the articles you see in the newspaper talk about 4 units per property, some up to 6. There's some flexibility in where you can go with this and how dense you want to make your single family. Commissioner Ruth?
Yeah, so if you do a lot split, then the requirement is you must put 2 units on each lot? Or on the lot you split off, you must put 2 units?
It's up to 2 units.
So if you only do 1 unit, isn't that the same thing as an ADU?
It's
What's the difference?
The difference is that it can be sold as a separate lot, and The other difference is our ADUs, you can build up to 1,200 square feet, and within this ordinance under SB9, you can only build up to 800 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Newman?
So as this is going to come down, property owners will be weighing whether or not to do an ADU or 2 units and look at the different requirements for each of those and see which one works best for them. Is that the way you see this working out?
I do. The ADU ordinance is almost more permissive and where you can
For
the
parking.
size requirements and parking. Whereas the SB9, if your motivation is to sell off a piece of your property, then it's probably the way to go.
Well, if you split it, but if you put
If you
2
split it.
houses on it, and then there may also be big differences in terms of utility fees and that sort of thing, depending on
Sure.
which direction you go.
And to be clear, the 2 units on the new parcel or the existing parcel cannot be sold separately. There. Okay. So we just, let's see. Okay, so now we're moving on, and we just went over the general requirements for for the ADUs. Now into the new chapter 17.75 for 2-unit developments. A lot of these standards you've already heard. So the first one is just that you can only have 2 residential units in total on each parcel. And they can either be 2 new units on a vacant lot or 1 new and 1 existing. And then any urban lot split has to comply with the standards we just went over. The eligibility requirements, we put them in both sections, so it's really clear to an applicant. They don't learn that they're ineligible after they've gone through their lot split. So I'm not going to relist them here for you. The permitting process, again, it's an administrative review. The city has to take action this time within 60 days. Coastal development permit may be required. Required noticing, but no public hearing. The reasons that I listed prior are the only reasons for denial. And then once they have an approved application, it would go to the building permit stage. And we wouldn't allow it to go to the building permit stage until the urban lot split parcel map has been recorded. So the objective development standards, again, in this ordinance, we're only as staff allowed to apply the objective standards. So the unit size, we did a maximum of 800 square feet. The state law says we have to allow at least 800 square feet. So tonight, after my presentation, I will be asking the Planning Commission if they want to increase that number or keep it the same. The setbacks set by state law is the first story is the same as what your R1 district is at 15 feet. You have the ability to decrease that if you'd like. We have a second story for the front yard of 20 feet and, oh, I'm sorry, yeah. And then for the garage, 20 feet, consistent with our R1 zone. The rear and side yard have a requirement to be at least 4 feet by state law, or it can be a maximum of 4 feet. The height, I incorporated the height standards from our ADU ordinance of 16 feet for the first story, 22 feet for a second story. The story maximum, just in case there was a really large lot that the development wouldn't be forced into a second story. I set it as a single story. We can talk about changing that this evening as well. And then an open space requirement for each unit is 48 square feet. Any questions here?
If there's only 1 story allowed, why do we have all these objective standards for the second story?
Because I think in many situations the lot sizes won't be large enough to accommodate an 800 square foot units within the first story. So we should have standards for a second story. It would make sense to increase that to 2 stories. Or
what does maximum 1 story mean then?
That if the development can occur within 1 story, then it has to occur within 1 story, but only if
Oh,
they,
well, that's not very clear to to our consumer public.
no, I think that we should probably amend that, because I don't think there's many examples in which you could get 2 800 square foot units without going to a 2nd story.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ruth?
Yeah. You know, a large portion of the lots in Capitola you stated are 40 by 80 lots. And the calculated footprint of a lot split on a 40 by 80 lot is 732 square feet, which would be allowed. So, but you're allowed an 800 square foot unit with a 732 square foot footprint. So what happens is we have to make some changes in the setbacks. Either the rear yard setback has to be decreased, the side yard, or the front yard setback. So I'm not clear on why we're having all these requirements when they don't really apply to a 40 by 80 lot if you split it in half.
So it's a great point. And I'm going to run through an example of a 40 by 80, but it reflects exactly what you just said. With a 40 by 100 lot, which we have some of those in Capitola, these standards could be met. So tonight I will be suggesting that we create less stringent standards for the smaller lots. So we'll get into that shortly.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? So parking requirements, 1 parking space per unit is allowed, with an exception for the transit or car share. Tandem spaces for separate residential units are not allowed. That's something we put in there, just thinking it'd be pretty inconvenient. The Planning Commission can direct us to do otherwise. Parking design, required off-street parking may be located within the minimum required setback areas from front, side, and rear property lines. Hollywood design with 2 parallel strips of pavement if a parking space were to be put in the front yard. Parking access from an alley shall maintain a 24-foot back out area, which may include the alley. So these standards also carried over from our ADU ordinance. Separation between residential units. There's a minimum 10 feet from any other structure on the parcel. However, the exception being units may be adjacent or connected if the structures meet building code safety standards and are sufficient to allow a separate conveyance. So this separation between residential units, I do think also will confuse. This is one I'd like to see amended because it says there's a 10-foot minimum separation. However, as long as you build it to code, it doesn't apply. So by state law. So I think it's better for us to probably just remove that standard and just list number 2 that they must, they have to meet building code. And then exceptions to development standards, non-conforming structures, they can be rebuilt in the place that they were, and there's no setback requirement for existing non-conforming. Any questions? No.
Is the existing, excuse me, I have a quick question. The existing non-conforming structures, is there a percentage that is it just kind of defer back to the percentage of demo that you can do to the structure to keep it within the existing non-conforming standards?
This is it's state law. So it doesn't follow our 80% rule for non-conforming. It's any non-conforming structure can be rebuilt in its exact place.
Gotcha.
Within this section of code.
Okay.
Yeah, and it deals kind of more with the setback requirements, for example. So say you have a structure that is not complying with Capitola's side or rear setback requirement, provided that the new structure is built in exactly the same footprint as the old one, then we would have to allow it.
So you could completely destroy the, I mean, you completely take the house all the way down to the foundation and rebuild it within the same footprint, and it would still be within the existing non-conforming structure.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Unless,
Okay.
yeah, unless there was some other, issue going on with it that wouldn't allow for demolition, like historic structure or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then we built in objective design standards. A lot of these were, Commissioner Westman?
So just so I understand how this works. Right now we have an ADU ordinance, which basically allows anyone to build a second unit on their property up to 1,200 square feet if they meet certain requirements. And the main difference between that process and the result is that the ADU cannot be sold separately. And with SB9, the purpose is to create small units that end up being sold separately from the original parcel. And so when we get into creating parcels that are going to have individual owners with an individual unit, then it seems like, the setbacks do become a bit of an issue, because I had sort of thought if you were going to have two 800 square foot units, like on a back of a flag lot, those units probably should not have any separation. It should be more like a duplex. But then you get into issues of how are those individual duplexes can those individual duplexes be sold separately, or does it have to be sold as a duplex?
So for 2 units on the same lot, anything on the same lot has to be sold together. So with that example of the duplex on the flag lot, it would sell as a duplex. They can't condo it and sell them separately.
Okay, so, I think we have to look at them because in that case, it would make sense to me to not have a setback between those 2 units, because there's not going to be space to do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt without raising my hand real quick? So Susan, are you suggesting there'd be like townhomes with a common wall in between them?
That's what I'm suggesting. I mean, if you're going to have 2 units on a parcel that small, I'm not really envisioning how you could design them and make it work. If you put, particularly a 10-foot setback between the 2 of them.
And doing so would result in more meaningful open space. There's a little bit of space between the 2 units. If you allow them to be joined, a shared wall, you result can be more open space.
But
So
that would reduce that 732 square foot print even more. Yeah.
So we should definitely take out number 1 under your separation.
Can I see a nod of heads for that?
Yes. I agree.
Yeah.
I would love to take out number 1. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So then the objective design standards, these are taken from our ADU ordinance. And so the entrance orientation, primary entrance to face the front or interior, there's an exception for alleys or side streets. Privacy impacts, so walls with windows within 8 feet of a residential property line. First story, they should have a 6-foot solid fence on the property line. Clear story or opaque windows for all windows facing the adjacent property. And then on the second story, all windows facing an adjacent property shall be clear story or opaque. And then decks and balconies are prohibited, and covered porches and patios, there's 150 square foot max, and 1/3 of that must be attached to the front of the dwelling unit. Materials and colors, I'd love feedback on this one. The new and existing, if there's an existing home and a new, they must match the materials and color. except what if the existing material is not permitted by building code. And then for 2 new units, the ordinance is drafted to say they must match material and color. So these are the units on the 2 units on the same parcel. So should they relate? Should they match?
So,
So what you're saying is that if you have an existing house and a new house gets in the back that's going to be sold, they don't have to match.
They
But
do.
there's no way, once you have 2 separate property owners, to enforce them having to paint their house the same color.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant on the same lot.
No, if they're
Okay.
on separate lots, they
Separate
don't
lots.
have to match.
No,
You're just saying that the 2 units, like the townhouse development, on the individual lots have to match.
yes. So if there's a existing home and they build a new 2-unit development, a new unit behind them on the same property, it would have to match the existing home. Or if they created a new lot and built 2 new units, they need to match in material and color.
But if I was going to build an ADU, I don't have to match the materials and color of the front house, do I?
I cannot remember off the top of my head. I don't know if Sean heard that question, but we're asking whether or not an ADU is required to match the primary home. I think it has to. I don't want to answer with.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, because I've seen a few around town and they don't match the house at all.
I can chime in here.
Okay.
Mute yours. The standards for materials, exterior materials, are within the objective standards, which do not apply for our limited standards ADUs. That would include one of the more common scenarios of a detached ADU that's less than 800 square feet and complies with minimum setbacks. So a common scenario would not have to apply that.
Okay. Thank you.
I see Commissioner Ruth and Commissioner Newman.
Yeah, Katie. I think when we talk about adding 2 units to a lot that has an existing house and the existing house remaining there, that doesn't apply in very many circumstances in Capitola. I think what we're going to see more likely is the small cottage type homes that you see in the Riverview Terrace and the Jewel Box. I see those houses being demolished and then the lot splits taking place. I don't think we're going to have that other kind of scenario very often. The other question I have is the front porches and patios. Would those go into the front yard setback area? Or would they have to be confined outside that setback area?
That's a great question. We should add to the ordinance what the allowed encroachments are, or projections into a setback, because that, if we want to allow it to be within the setback area, we should state that within our code.
Well, then that reduces, if you allow a 150-foot porch and has to be in the setback area, then that reduces the footprint on a 40 by 80 lot to roughly 580 feet.
Yeah, is allowing a deck to project into a front yard acceptable by the planning commission?
No.
No.
What, can I ask why? Commissioner Ruth or Commissioner Weston? Your reasoning?
Yeah, for me, the standard setback in most of all of our neighborhoods is 15 feet.
Mhm.
So if you have a deck extending out beyond that, you're encroaching probably in parking areas and, just basically encroaching into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that as well. I don't agree with E at all, though. The materials and colors seems to be getting too far into the weeds.
That's where I was going also.
I agree.
I'm impelled to restate what I've said many times, which is I don't think we should be the aesthetic czars. And the best example of that is Venetian courts, which would, of course, never be built under E, and has been one of the outstanding features of Capitola.
Yeah, I can agree with modifying E and getting rid of the matching materials and colors.
Why don't we say complementary? They complement each other.
Yeah, and who's going to decide that?
It's not too much of an objective standard.
Yeah, you could say that they have to have like 25% of a shared material or something, or you could
Forget it.
Forget it.
Yes.
Okay.
You're trying to design something where you don't even have a template for.
You probably won't see one of them from the street anyway, right? Because one will be behind the other. So, okay, so we'll take that out. I did want to clarify though on the covered porches. We do in the R1 district in our front yards. We allow landing places, patios, and decks 18 inches or less from grade to, they can be in the front yard as long as that 5 feet are maintained. So that's an allowance of the front decks can go 10 feet into the front yard. Just to be clear, and we do allow them in side yards, but they have to maintain 3 feet, where our side yards are so small here, it wouldn't make sense. But so if you wanted to allow a deck to go a certain distance into the front yard, it would be consistent with the R1 standards right now.
In a porch.
Front porch, yep.
I would agree with that. I'm kind of, as long as there's, I think if designed properly, I feel like that would be, it would complement the street and allow parking, obviously, like not, but just.
Well, what about the prohibition on all decks and balconies? Is that something
that's for that's second story decks and balconies. So I should have, I typed that in incorrectly.
And I assume the commissioners, based on our recent attitudes, would agree with that.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Commissioner Westman?
So I have a concern, and I don't know where really to bring this up, but by doing this, we're greatly increasing the amount of impervious surface that we have in town if these units get built. And for example, in the Riverview Terrace neighborhood, there is no storm drain system. So all of that water simply runs down the street. And because so many people have been putting in more decks and land, impervious surface, it's beginning to become a problem. So at what point do we look at, the stormwater for all this new development, for the providing the water for it? I mean, where does any of this come in? Because if you have a lot more units go in, the neighborhood above me, we already flood now. We have for about the last 5 years. When does all of that come into play? I mean, usually in a subdivision, there's something that deals with stormwater and stormwater improvements and how those things get put into place.
And actually, that's one of the biggest parts of a review of a subdivision now, to be in compliance with the state law. It's really, it's challenging. We've seen a lot of applications come in that get held up on stormwater. So that is an excellent question. And it might mean that Layla and I need to do more research. I'm not sure, Layla, if you're prepared for a question on whether or not we can, I believe we can require stormwater requirements, and that typically it's when you it's part of our master application, and it's something we have not addressed in this ordinance. So we can come back with more information on that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But it is an issue, and currently our normal process is stormwater is reviewed separately by Public Works, and there's a lot of review that goes into that to make sure it's in compliance.
It
Sure.
seems like we might need to require a lot more on-site infiltration.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be ways to do it, but we just need to make certain we have that done so we don't create a problem for our community.
Yeah, and one option might be as well to, potentially require that certain landscaping include low impact development, as well as more pervious, soils and substrates and things like that. But we can definitely research that a little bit more, Commissioner, and get back to you, because I think that is that is a very important point.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna continue. Okay, next are the general requirements for a 2-unit development. I found a couple errors in here that you'll see with strike through underline. But the utility connections, each unit shall be on a separate utility connection. It's stated directly between each dwelling, which made it sound like you had to put the utility right between the 2 dwellings, which the intent was that it has to extend from each dwelling unit to the utility for water, sewer, or electrical utilities. So just having that connection to the road. And then we're allowed to require dedication of any easements for public services and access to the public right-of-way. The second standard for fire sprinklers, that should be removed. That was tied to the ADU law. And I apologize, I repeated that and threw it in this ordinance, but really all these developments have to meet fire code. And so I don't want to put an exception in there. Vacation rentals are prohibited. Separate sale of primary dwelling. The units within a 2-unit development on the same parcel may not be sold or conveyed separately. The guaranteed allowance is listed here. Again, I had a reference to accessory dwelling units, so I'm going to strike that when I bring it back. Converting and replacing existing structures. This is the non-conforming that we've talked about already. And then the land use is that it shall be unlawful to use any dwelling unit under this chapter for any use other than residential. Any questions on the general requirements?
Does that mean home occupation use is prohibited for offices and so forth? Under G?
Yeah, if we want to allow home occ, we should probably state that. Here, Layla, would you agree?
Yeah, and we would definitely want to make sure that still the primary use is a residential use. And then if someone is, using an extra room or something like that for some type of home occupation, then we can probably specify that. But the main point is that it has to be a residential use.
Well, I
primarily.
think that's implied in our home occupation requirements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I had a quick question. This is Commissioner Christensen. About utility connections and possibly even public works requirements with stormwater, like we were just talking about. I know that new connections and stormwater especially can be pretty cost prohibitive. Is there any subsidies through the state of California that they're allowing discounted connection rates or water allowances or anything else? Does anybody know any information about that?
Not that we've heard of yet. Unfortunately, a lot of times when these types of regulations come down from the state, it's usually the regulation first, and then helpful programs and things like that sort of trail. So hopefully that would be something that will come forward in the future. But right now, I have not seen anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So any additional questions on 2-unit developments?
I have one.
Okay.
I'm not sure how you're going to answer this, but how do you create 2 800 square foot units on a 1,280 square foot lot and meet our setback requirements?
You can't. You can't. So we would have to, if we had that scenario of somebody having a 1,200 square foot lot, which is the minimum allowed by state law, we would have to allow them to go higher and to build out into the setbacks. They could not comply with that, the standards we have in place.
But they could build 2 400 square foot houses.
They could, but they're permitted to build up to 800. And so.
Well, then they should have a bigger lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a state law setting that minimum square footage of the 800 square feet that kind of tends to supersede almost any objective standard that we put in. It's kind of intended to be read throughout all of the objective standards that, yes, these are the objective standards that apply, but if any of them happen to preclude the construction of 2 minimum 800 square foot units on either lot, then that particular requirement would not apply. That's sort of the trump card.
Yeah, so within your example, if it was limited to 1 story, I mean, they would be able to develop from the front. There would be no setbacks, and they could go up because you can't get 1,600 square feet in a single story on a 1,200 square foot lot. So good questions. Okay. So I was going to run you through an example. If you want, we could open the public hearing now and then do an example, and then I'll have specific questions for the Planning Commission. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. We can open it up to public comments. Anybody from the public wishing to speak on this item, now is your chance to get in your issues and comments for our consideration. Any hands raised? Any emails?
And I'm going to look to Sean.
I do not see any hands raised at this time, and I do not have any new public comments written in.
We should put this in the city newsletter that goes out every month.
Oh, I did just get a hand raised.
Okay.
I was sent an email as well as a hand raised, so I think I'm going to unmute Paula Bradley and see if she'd like to explain her comments.
Okay, Paula Bradley, you have the floor. You're muted.
Thank you. I sent an email with several questions, so I was hoping I could get a response to the email. If it was received, I sent it to public comments.
So Katie, are we taking questions from the public, or are we just making them available to comment?
Typically they have up to 3 minutes to comment. We could, if you want to read your email, or
I don't see a copy of the email, so
we,
if you want to go ahead and.
Okay, let me find that email here. Yeah, it's quite a few questions. So,
well, you could go ahead and read it, and I don't know that we'll necessarily answer all the questions, but it'll be food for thought, and we can address them at our, as we feel appropriate.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. The first question is in the ordinance section 16.78.020 about eligibility in D3. I didn't understand that section, and I was hoping someone could explain it. And also with that question, I was wondering where that requirement comes from, if it's from Senate Bill 9 or the government.
If you could speak into the phone or the microphone,
Oh, okay. Hold
very
on.
difficult to hear you.
Putting my headset on. So. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I put my headset on.
Sorry about that. So I was asking if someone could explain ordinance section 16.78.020 eligibility and under that D3, that's in the staff report page 4 or the packet page 34. And I was wondering, where did that requirement come from? Is it from Senate Bill 9 or is it from the government code reference, the Ellis Act? And then I can continue reading my questions.
Yes, please continue.
Okay, and I can send it also, try sending it again.
We have it.
Oh, you have it. Okay, so if I understand correctly, it seems like with the requirements of D3 and D4, that an urban lot split is only intended to be allowed for an owner-occupied unit prior to the lot split. And then the next one, section D3 and D4, if I understand it correctly, only applies if there is a demo, but not if there's an existing unit not proposed to be demolished. And furthermore, so an existing unit could be either owner or tenant occupied and still be eligible. And then section 8 further down, does that section mean that an owner in the city can only apply for a 2-lot split one time ever? That's what it sounds like to me. And then number 6, only a new unit on a new second lot is restricted to the 800-foot maximum, but not an existing unit. And an existing unit then could be any size, whatever size it happens to be. And then do the setbacks, if there's an existing unit and a new lot, would the existing unit have to meet the new development standards for setbacks? And then 7, I think I heard Katie say that 1 lot can be sold with a 2-lot split, but if it's 2 separate lots, they can both be sold, right? And then I know she said something like if there's 2 new units on 2 new lots, they have to be sold together. I'm asking for clarity there. And that the last question, bear with me, is a 2-unit development is 2 detached units. And I'm just asking, is that right? So those were my questions. Sorry, there's so many.
Yeah,
So,
good question.
so Katie, let me jump in here and just say that some of these questions seem to have already been answered, but let me ask you a question. I mean, these can be answered by a visit to the front desk for the most part, right? And the advantage of that of Ms. Bradley bringing up these questions to our attention would be to stimulate Planning Commission's questions and concerns and things that maybe have not been addressed. I frankly would be interested in a review of D3 and 4. Maybe you could just go over those quickly. I really don't know how to handle questions in the public comment section. Maybe we should just digest these and ask if there are any more public comments before we start answering questions.
Yeah, Sean, are there any more public comments or?
There have been no other comments made.
Okay.
All right. Well, I would think we would deserve some. Go Go ahead. Katie, you have the floor.
I'd be happy to bring back a response to all of these questions in the next packet if you'd like. Or what they're in-depth questions. I think it is actually a really good question that number 4 about sections D3 and D4 and whether or not that applies. A lot of what we have in there are a lot of really good technical questions in here. Paula is a great local planner, so she knows her stuff, and I'm glad to get these questions, but I would like to take the time to review them and get accurate answers. One, like, definitely if you do a lot split, I just want to clarify that there's 2 new lots. You can only sell the 2 new lots, each lot separately. They can each have 2 units on them. The 2 units on the separate lots cannot be sold individually, or the 2 units on the same lot cannot be sold individually. I'd be happy to bring back this list with a response for the next Planning Commission. I'd be happy to meet with Paula beforehand. So sooner rather than later.
I would like to hear the answers to 3 and 4.
Right.
Well, so
we
why
wanna-
don't you go ahead and do that then and plan a slide with these answers for the next presentation, and then also meet with Paula if she so desires.
Sounds good.
Is that okay with the commission?
Sounds good.
All right. So if we have no more public comments, then we can go back to Planning Commission deliberation. Katie, you wanted to ask some questions. I had more presentation.
Yeah, I have some really pointed questions. I'm getting a good feel, I think, where the Planning Commission is headed, but I wanted to run through an example. I think Mick has already run through this example verbally, but just quickly. So an example of a 40 by 80 foot lot is seen here, a minimum of 20 foot frontage. This is our typical lot in Capitola, divided straight down the middle. When we
Lot's not showing up right
You
now.
put your
it's not.
screen share back up, please.
Okay, thank you. Screen share. Okay, screen 2. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, so here's our example of a 40 by 80 lot. It's subdivided into 2 lots. It meets the minimum frontage of 20 feet. We put in our setbacks, 15-foot front yard, and then 4 feet around the other yards. And what we're left with, as Mick stated, is 732 square feet. And we have a requirement by law to be able to build 2, not just 1, 2 800 square foot units on each lot. So and here's that objective, that guarantee that the objective development standards and objective design standards of this chapter shall not prohibit a 2-unit development with up to 800 square feet. So in this scenario, the Planning Commission, it'd be good for our ordinance to identify where we want to be flexible. So does height matter the most? Do setbacks matter the most? Do front yard setbacks matter the most? So in this example, to get those 2 units, they would be going up to 3 stories for sure and breaking the height limit. So what we did is we looked at our typical lots by neighborhood and broke it down for, like, the Jewel Box. You typically have a 40 by 80 lot, 44 First Avenue, West Capitola, 40 by 100. So we broke down the different neighborhoods, the dimensions of the lot, and then could they accommodate 2 800 square foot single story? Is it feasible? And what we found is you really need a minimum 4,000 square foot lot in order to comply within the standard. So a lot of our neighborhoods would not. The Jewel Box, Riverview Terrace, Depot Hill is a mix. So my next question for you is, now that we've concluded that the ordinance we drafted doesn't really work for most lots under 4,000 square feet, where does the planning commission see room for us to be more flexible? Because I do think we need to develop some different standards. We can either outline different standards for lots less than 4,000 square feet. So we could decrease the side yard setback to 3 feet and the front yard setback to 12, and then they'd have a bigger building pad. Is height less important and they could go higher? We already talked about the fact that as drafted, it really should say 2 stories. The side yard setbacks, the rear setback, should we decrease the open space? So I'm looking for some feedback on this item. And if you'd like, I'm happy to bring this back if you want time to think about it and me list questions as a follow-up, or if you want to work through them tonight. But I have a few slides like this.
Could you run through your calculations 2 screens back? I didn't understand them.
Oh.
So just take the jewel box one. I just need one so you can tell me how you calculated these things.
Okay, so the jewel box, the typical lot is 40 by 80.
Right.
Once you take the 4-foot setbacks off, it becomes the building pad, which you can build on, is 32 feet. And the length of the building pad, when you take 80 feet and you subtract the 19 feet for the front yard setback and the rear yard setback, is 61.
Yeah.
So then when you multiply that together, the 32 by 61.
Okay, I get that. And why can't you put 2 800 square foot single story homes?
The building pad is only 732 square feet.
So, what we didn't do here is we didn't do the subdivision. So then you would like divide it in half on your smaller lot.
So then you get 976, which you could still.
And there's an extra like 221 for the new side yard that you've just created on each of the 2 lots.
Unless they're attached.
What?
Unless they're attached.
Well, but for the, so sorry, I should have run through that table a little more thorough at the end, but the 732, this is the correct number based on we would have created 2 more setbacks of the 4-foot setbacks. So those numbers were wrong, sorry. But going through that exercise, for all of the lots that are 40 by 80, this would be, if they did an urban lot split, the 732.
But
Katie, actually, if we leave that 10-foot separation standard in there, it's even less.
Correct, yeah.
But it's just the footprint. You can go 2 stories. Why did you say 3 stories?
Because if you get 2, so you can't meet the 800 on the first and second. You need to go into a 3rd story.
Isn't it 732 feet of footprint?
Yep.
Yeah, but you got to put 2 units in that 732 square feet. So you need 1,600 square feet.
Oh, you need 2 units.
Yeah.
2 units. You're allowed 2 units. So.
So does the parking count in the 800 square feet?
So we haven't specified in the parking if the parking needs to be covered or uncovered. I was assuming uncovered, that I do have slides on parking as well. But the parking.
Before you leave that slide, what happens to Commissioner Newman's suggestion if you just squish those 2 units together? What's the square footage of the gap between them?
These are 2 separate lots, so you wouldn't squish these 2 together. You would have 2 units on each block, on each blue building pad.
You can have attached lots and attached units.
Within
It could be like row houses, right?
Yeah, like
townhouses.
We could if we design it that way. The way we've drafted the ordinance, you could not have a structure over the property line into the neighboring property. But we
take
could.
it right up.
Yeah.
So what is that square footage though? Would we get our 800 feet if we were to say you can build right up to the property line?
So
between the houses?
we would meet that.
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah,
Or we would also,
that's an easy fix.
yeah, and also if we went to 3 feet setbacks for the side and rear, we would hit the 800.
That makes it a little close to your neighbor.
Yeah, better to have them attached.
Okay, between where their new property line is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna show you this really quick. So I went through that exercise and I actually have a slide. So if you decreased your setback from 4 feet to 3, you'd have an 854 square foot pad. But if you were to allow it to have a 0 foot setback in the middle, your building pad is a lot larger at 976. So
Yeah. I think it also makes sense, maybe instead of doing it that way, you could also reduce the front yard setback slightly.
okay, so I'm going to go back to this list. So it seems like the internal setback between the 2 lots could be decreased to 0. And then any more thoughts on the front yard setback, as Commissioner Ruth is suggesting?
Yeah,
I
I
would think
prefer
that
that other than increasing the height or reducing the side yard, rear yard setbacks.
Yeah, I agree
Less
with that.
intrusive on the neighbor.
I agree
Yeah.
with Nick. I
Yeah.
agree.
Well,
with
no, wait a minute.
Nick.
So if we did if you did the 0 lot line between the 2 units, you've got your 960 square feet. You don't have to compromise on your front setback.
Yeah, but if you chose not to do that,
Well, then it's not approved because you have to meet all these setbacks.
could we require that as one of the objective standards? They have to have a common wall.
Well, no, only if it's a small enough lot. They can do whatever they want to if the lot's big enough. But
Yeah.
in the case of the
Well, I don't
Jill
disagree.
box,
I don't disagree with that. I'm not disputing that, but I don't know that we can require a 0 lot line. That would be my question. And if we can't, then I prefer the front yard setback to be reduced rather than anything else.
I
But
agree
yeah,
with Commissioner Wilk, it's not that we're requiring it. We're saying here are the requirements and that's the way you can meet them.
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And I would be reluctant to change the front yard setback because that's what sets the community is, the amount of yards and everybody in, the streetscape and the curb appeal and all that has to do. That's what the whole community enjoys. So a lot smaller front setback I would think would have a bigger impact on the community as a whole, as opposed to just your neighbor.
I think the common wall makes more sense because then obviously you get into some design things and perhaps they would like to complement the 2 front structures if they have a common wall. I think it alleviates a lot of those kind of problems.
But remember, there's going to be no front yard because you're going to have 2 driveways there to provide parking for these units. The lot's only 40 feet wide, 20 feet of it's going to go to do 2 10-foot driveways. So
Yeah, but they're going to be Hollywood style, so they're going to be very grassy. I don't know. It's not.
So the driveway is
is
10 feet wide.
All the more reason not to shorten the front yard setback.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, the cars are going to be poking on the sidewalk.
Okay, so I'm hearing don't modify the front yard setback, modify the internal setback, keep the open space requirement of 48 square feet.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we've got some square footage to play with if we have a 0 lot line, because that brings the total footprint up to 900 and some square feet. So we could reduce or increase the rear yard setback to give someone a little bigger rear yard.
Layla, do you have
Yeah, if I could just ask a clarifying question, because I'm not a planner, so so that I understand. When we're talking about reducing the internal setback between the 2 properties to 0, I'm just thinking of the scenario where we would have the lot split and then the construction of 2 units on each lot is what the planning commission is saying we would reduce the internal setback to 0. So the two units on either lot would be very close together. But then if we're talking about 4 units, would those also be connected, or I guess I'm just
It'd
trying
be
to
like
think
a
of-
fourplex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there was a time when 0 lot line subdivisions were pretty popular. And so I think there's some pretty good examples out there of ones that have been done.
We have some on Gray Street.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I sort of go back and forth for this because, I understand we have to abide by the state law. I understand there's a need for providing additional housing. And, I think our ADU ordinance could work pretty well. This one gets so complicated because they're for sale units. And, that makes it a little more complicated, but I mean, they're definitely going to have an impact on the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
then-
would like to make a suggestion and just incorporate the 0 lot line and increase the rear yard setback to make the footprint 800 square feet.
So one concern I have about that is it's good design usually isn't just a box. You usually like to have a little articulation in the structure. So if we were to limit it to 800 square feet, we would, they'd be able to produce it, but it's going to be a box. And to really keep the tradition and the flow of our neighborhoods, I think we want
That's
to
a
see
good point.
more articulation.
Yeah.
And
Good
just
point.
to add maybe a helpful fact is that the parking requirement, state law allows for the city to and requires access to either unit and either lot that's created by the lot split. However, state law does not mandate that has to be in the form of a driveway or a separate driveway for both lots. So there is a contemplation there if the planning commission wanted to consider it to potentially also have a shared driveway, but then, still requiring the on-site parking for each unit.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that creates, again, some more complications for sale units and the fact that we don't want tandem parking going on in that driveway.
Of course.
But, at this point, I think we've given Katie some pretty good ideas to look at.
Yeah.
And I don't, for me personally, I haven't hard and fast excluded any new changes that she wants to propose. I'm just trying to give some direction.
Okay, and I do have some slides on parking. So the maximum unit size, we have it at 800 square feet. In the R1, it's the floor area ratio.
Katie, I think Commissioner Christensen had a.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. No, I could cover that when you talk about parking. Go, continue.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. So maximum unit size 800 square feet. I'm just looking for a nod of heads if you'd like us to keep the max at 800 square feet. I know Los Gatos is allowing 1,200 square feet. I think Oakland's allowing a lot more square feet. So how do you feel about 800 square feet?
So that's the minimum and the maximum then?
It's the
Well,
maximum of our code and the minimum by right by the state law.
I don't think we can accommodate anything larger on the size of our lots.
But
What
what if
about-
they could?
What about lots in Cliffwood Heights, for example?
Yeah, I think
Can we have different standards for different size lots?
Yes.
You know, so it's like Commissioner Newman said, I mean, there's a huge difference in a 9,000 square foot lot in Cliffwood Heights and in a, 4,000 square foot lot in Riverview Terrace or the Jewel Box. So maybe we need to have two sets of standards, one for lots up to a certain size and one beyond that size. I know it makes it more complicated, but it would be more realistic for the city.
So if we're going to cram everybody into the Jewel Box, let's cram everybody into the Cliffwood Heights too. Let's make everybody suffer.
Well, Susan, I don't think we really need to do that. If we just have a larger maximum like Los Gatos, it will only apply in the larger lots because we're having enough trouble fitting the 800 square foot units in the Jewel Box.
That's true, because it's not a guarantee. If we were to have 1,200 listed, the guarantee is only up to the 800 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes good sense, Commissioner Newman.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
point.
Well, then the question is, what is that number and why?
Well, isn't it within the ADU that you can have a minimum? I think for a single bedroom or a studio, it's $850, and then if you provide a 2-bedroom, the minimum or the maximum is 1,000. Isn't that correct? Is that right?
1,200.
1,200.
1,200.
Could that apply in this circumstance? Saying if you had, the maximum square feet for a single occupant, a single occupant for a unit would be 800, and the maximum would be 12. I mean, if the lot could allow that.
I think that really muddies the water.
Yeah.
I could go with Commissioner Newman's proposal that if we have it at 1,200 square feet, you're not guaranteed to get that. That just says that's the maximum it can be. What you're guaranteed under state law is the 800 square feet. So if you can't fit it on and meet the setback requirements, you don't get more than 800 square feet. I mean, that seems pretty clear to me and would work.
And to Commissioner Christensen's point, do you want that tied to bedrooms as it is in our ADU ordinance, the requirement for 2 bedrooms?
No, I don't care how many bedrooms they have, or they want one big room.
Okay.
That's up to them.
I'm with Commissioner Westman.
Yeah.
So is the notion here is that we should have the square footage for our maximum ADUs be consistent with our square footage for the 2-unit developments? So that won't be a driver as to which way they go?
For me, they're really not connected. I just think it's a good suggestion to have the 1,200 square feet, as Commissioner Newman said, because it gives a little more flexibility for people who do happen to have a larger lot.
So are you going to define a minimum lot size for that?
Well, what we define is they'd have to meet all the setback requirements that we're going to impose.
They also, the minimum lot size is 40% of the existing lot. That's set up by the state law.
So
what safeguards are there that someone can't build a 1,200 square foot on a 40 by 80 lot?
Yeah, no, they won't be able to, but we better make
Why?
this ordinance so it's easily amended because this is a work in progress. I mean, we could go on all night on this.
So I was thinking I'll take your comments from this evening and I'll come back with an updated draft and we'll work through it. But I'm hearing to consider 1,200 square feet and knowing that the guaranteed allowance is only up to the 800 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you going to define that 1,200 square feet in certain size lots?
No, because it will only.
Are you going to exempt 40 by 80 lots from that 1,200 square feet?
No, the 40 by 80 will be forced into the 800 square foot. I see what you're saying. Because we're making we're we're decreasing the standards for lots under 4,000 square feet to be able to accommodate the 800 square foot development. So possibly the best route is to only allow units greater than 800 square feet on lots that are greater than 400 square feet, because we're creating decreased setbacks. And
Yeah, you'll have to look at it and study it and come up with a
suggestion.
suggestion.
Okay.
More sleepless nights.
Yeah, you know, but before we leave this, you know, I've been sending all of you some information from this organization that started, to the chagrin of the city attorney. But, you know, there's a movement afoot to repeal SB9, and it's being led by the mayor of Redondo Beach, Bill Brand, and Jovita Mendoza, a council member in Brentwood, California. You know, it's been supported by the Southern California Association of Governments. And a recent poll on January 28th showed 71% disapprove of SB9. And the organization is called Our Neighborhoods, or what is it? Our Neighborhood Voices. And it's a coalition of a lot of different city governments and neighborhood leaders. You can Google it for information, but I would advise everyone, people listening, all of you on the commission, to take a look at this, because they're attempting to get enough signatures to put this on the ballot in November to repeal SB9. And I think it stands a good chance of being repealed at that time, if hopefully they'll get enough signatures. And just one other thing, the city of Woodside, I don't know if you saw this, declared themselves a wildlife sanctuary so they don't have to follow the SB9 regulations.
Woodside.
I think we should secede from the union.
State of Jefferson.
At least from California.
All right, can we get back to the topic at hand?
Okay, next I wanted to discuss height and flexibility within height. I think one of our guiding principles as we're looking at this ordinance is that we really want to make sure that the new units fit within our single family development. I had taken the ADU allowances for height of 16 feet for the first story and 22 feet for the second story. The R1 standard is 25 feet. If the planning commission would like, we could make those numbers consistent with the R1 and have it at 25 feet. So anything that's built doesn't look a little bit shorter than the single family homes that are around.
I agree.
The difficulty is they're not going to have the same setbacks that a single family house has to conform to. You know, it's 25 feet's fine if you have, you know, a 15-foot rear yard. 25 feet has a huge impact if you have a 4-foot rear yard. So for right now,
it's also a solid wall, Susan, because there is no additional setback for the second story.
That's right. So for me, I'd leave it the way it is tonight.
Okay, and Commissioner Christensen?
The only thing that I would comment on is that these seem pretty consistent with the ADU ordinance. So, I mean, regardless of whether it's 22 or 25, you're still going to have a structure that's closer to the rear and side property lines, in any given rear yard. So I don't see too much difference, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna move forward with how it's drafted in terms of height, but we'll take out that maximum 1 story as discussed previously.
Yeah.
Setbacks we discussed. Thank you. We'll move on. Open space we discussed. There's direction to keep the 48 square feet. Okay, parking. This is, I think, the last big discussion for us on this. So the parking requirements is that there's 1 required space per unit, and there's exceptions for transit or car share. Tandem space for a separate residential unit is not allowed. Parking design, required off-street parking may be located within a minimum required setback area from front, side, and rear property lines. I believe that's out of the state code, the state law. The second standard is from our ADU ordinance. Hollywood design with 2 parallel strips of pavement is allowed. If you do parking in the front yard. Also, parking is access from an alley shall maintain a 24-foot back out area, which may include the alley. That's from our ADU standards. So thinking about parking, some real big concerns came up. Within the urban lot split, we also have requirements that lots without 20 feet or more of frontage on a street will not be permitted, except that frontage requirements for flag lots may be satisfied by a driveway or private road accessing a street with a minimum of 10 feet in width or a maximum of 40% of the lot width or 20 feet, whichever is less. That's our typical driveway standard. So I tried to put what parking would work with this example that we showed previously. And you're starting to see not only is parking an impact, but we're going to lose a lot of street parking because of all the new curb cuts that would occur from this ordinance. So we have the ability to direct that. We have the ability, instead of saying a minimum driveway width of 10 feet, we can say that's the maximum. We can also state that there can only be 1 curb cut per development, so that there'd be shared access points onto these lots. We were allowed to have agreements put in place we could have access agreements. So the thought being here is, if we were to allow a subdivision, that we could create standards so that there's still only 1 curb cut, so that we maintain the street parking. Because as we lose that street parking, not only do we have a minimum requirement on the site, but also we won't be able to make up for it in the street. So I wanted to see if there was support for, should we add standards to minimize curb cuts? We'll think through it. This is really rough right now and it hasn't been assessed at all, but if you'd like us to look into it, we can look into minimizing curb cuts. And also, should we create maximum driveway widths tied to these really tight subdivisions rather than minimum?
I agree with limiting the curb cuts and having a maximum width on the driveways.
I would agree with that. I'd also suggest on the 40 by 80 lots that the driveways be required to be on the outside property lines of each lot, to leave the center area open for landscaping.
Well, yeah. So for clarification, Commissioner Roof, you're saying to push the buildings to the outside interior lot line and to use the center?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm saying push the driveway to the outside lot line on each side.
I see.
Oops, sorry.
That
might be challenging in this scenario.
That would keep 20 feet of open space in the front of the houses.
You know, they're going to park in front of one of the parking spaces is going to be in front of the houses.
So I think one of the big, huge problems with this whole ordinance that we have no ability not to comply with is going to be the impact on parking in our neighborhoods big time as this starts to evolve. And anything we can do to lessen what's going to be a tremendous, to mitigate what's going to be a tremendous negative impact. Some of our neighborhoods already have parking problems, and this is not going to help at all.
Hence, you agree with the minimum curb cut?
Minimum curb cuts, and I know we just want objective standards, so we can't put something in along the lines that the driveways have to be designed so as to minimize impact on off-street parking, but maybe we can come up with some objective standards that tend in that direction.
I had a question, Katie, for staff.
Mhm.
With these ordinances, I didn't really hear anything about placing parking possibly underneath the structures, or it's like given an option 2 in your slide here, the one on the right-hand side. If you came down the center of a shared driveway, say, and the parking was located, if the height was increased and the structure was built on the 2nd story and there was parking available underneath, would that be something that would be allowed or encouraged, or how do you feel about that?
Do you mean like digging down, subterranean, or covered within the 1st story?
Within the 1st story.
Okay. Yeah, I think if it can be accommodated in the square footage, I also think we can guide the parking. We can say that parking should be in the behind the homes if we want. We can build in some standards like that for. I'll look at what's out there and bring back examples of how we can kind of direct parking to meet the objective of minimizing the impact to the street as well as preserving our front yards. So
Yeah.
I mean, just looking around in the village, I see a lot of development that's shoved into very small spaces. And it just seems that a lot of them, I mean, that are creatively designed can, tuck parking in, you go through a driveway and you hook around and can park inside of a, covered area that's within the primary structure or, under the primary structure. And it seemed to work well for, small spaces. So just.
Yeah, that might work in Cliffwood Heights. It certainly won't work in the rest of the community. But again, my suggestion is if you push the driveways to the outside of each lot, you have a 20-foot space in between, you can still maintain an on-street parking spot for a small vehicle, a compact vehicle, and you've also allowed 20 feet in between the 2 driveways to accommodate some landscaping. So that would be my suggestion.
And it may also depend, commissioners, on the location and orientation of any existing residents or existing structures. That might be something that also just kind of keep in mind.
And one of my main goals would be to create parking that's going to be used for parking. I have become to be not a big fan of garages because particularly in the neighborhood I live in where people have small homes, very few people use their garage to park a car in. So in this case, I would like to see the parking, it could be covered, but not as a garage.
I would tend to agree with that as well.
Other comments? Commissioner Christensen?
No further comments.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring back some standards. Then here I just list the objective design standards. I just wanted to see if I think you've already provided me feedback on this. So there's no more comments needed there. And that is the end of my presentation and questions for you. So I really appreciate your attention to detail tonight and getting through this. And I hope to bring back something. Layla and I will be working on this and bringing back the next round. Any comments on the overall process or questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Westman.
I have a question a little bit about process. I agree with Commissioner Newman that, this is something that we want to get done because I think we can build in some safeguards that will help our neighborhoods. I also feel like I don't want to see staff caught in this back and forth with the Coastal Commission, which I know can be extremely time consuming. So I would like you to give us some update on where they are with their requirements, because I really don't want to submit something to them until we have a pretty good, clear understanding about what they are going to require to get an LCP amendment adopted. So I think we sort of have a two-track thing going. We need to do our work as a city, but we also need to know what the Coastal Commission's doing. So in the end, we can link those two together to have a successful submission to them. So I hope you'll keep us updated on their thoughts as we go through this.
I will. You know, usually I try to share an ordinance well in advance with the Coastal Commission, which we did with our outdoor dining. And yeah, we are in discussions now, and hopefully they'll be able to give me more direction, because they were very vague during our meeting of exactly what they expect to see.
Are you going to give a presentation to the city council?
Not yet. I'd like to work through with our planning experts, the planning commission first, and then they know we're working on this, but I really want to fine tune it with you all first, and then we'll bring it to planning to city council when it's ready.
I had one last question. Is outside of the coastal zone, just for clarification, I'm sorry if I make you repeat yourself, but this is enacted now, so people can actually do this now if they're outside the coastal zone?
Correct.
Okay. But inside the coastal zone, there's a little, it's muddy, or it's basically they can't.
They cannot do it now. They can't bring us so I think there's disconnect, as Layla pointed out earlier, between what the state law says and the interpretation by the Coastal Commission. So from what I've heard from the Coastal Commission is that we shouldn't be reviewing any SB9 applications within the coastal zone until we have our ordinance certified by the Coastal Commission.
I see. Okay.
And we know how fast that happens. All right.
Thank you
Any other
for
questions
that.
on item 6B before we move to the director's report? Let us then move to the director's report. Katie, do you have anything else?
I do not. I'm going to be publishing the RFP for our housing element update, which is another fun project ahead of us. So that's it. No other information for you tonight.
And then you're going to maybe have something on balconies next meeting?
We're hoping for the next meeting. We're doing some research and looking into, we're going to bring forth about 5 different examples of from different cities and what their objective standards are. We'll also go over the floor area ratio and how we remove the second story decks from the floor area ratio. And we're not going to come forward with an ordinance for you. We just want to get kind of less than we had tonight, just direction, a work session item to see whether or not you want us to move forward with an amendment.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioners' communications. Any commissioners wish to make a final statement?
Chair Wilk, if I could just suggest that we take an action on the SB9 item. I think Katie had mentioned potentially continuing the item, and then we could keep public comment open, or we could close public comment at the commission's discretion.
Well, I didn't think we had an action on 6B. It was just a presentation. So we need to authorize a second presentation?
No, there is action within the recommendation. Sorry, I don't have a slide for the recommendation.
Can I make a motion to continue this item to our March 7th meeting? And I think it's appropriate to continue to leave the public hearing open, because this is going to impact our community and we would like to hear from them.
I would second.
Correct. Point of clarification, I think it's March 3rd.
Okay, March 3rd, sorry.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Westman and a second by Commissioner Ruth. Wait, Louis, we have a roll call for continuance.
Yes, please. Commissioner Christensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Newman?
Aye.
Commissioner Ruth?
Aye.
Commissioner Westman?
Aye.
Chair Wilk?
Aye. Okay, now we'll move to commission communications. Do any commissioners have final words?
Happy
Courtney, your
Valentine's
hand is
Day.
raised.
Oh, no, my hand's been raised
It-
for a while. It's gone, so sorry.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. With that then, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank
Night,
you.
everyone.
All right.
Night.
Thank you.